Motherhood, where we talk about finding joy at home and what it means to be a stay-at-home mom and what is good about that. And today we're talking about vocations. So what's a vocation, Allison?
What is a vocation? So I think that if you ask most people what a vocation is, or if you even look in the dictionary to try to find out what a vocation is, it's all related to career.
Yes.
It's what, the job that speaks to you, the job that you were meant for. It's a career, it's an occupation.
Yes.
And I actually
Being
looked
a
it up
nurse.
in the dictionary. Yeah. Yes, so I always felt like I probably had a vocation, but I just screwed it up because I never had a job that I felt like, this is my thing.
Yeah.
This is what I was made for.
Yeah.
I just never had that, so I never really liked to think about it.
No. And here is my thing that I've been thinking about is that I've had a lot of jobs and I felt called to be a nurse. So I felt like that was my calling, was to be a nurse. And then I thought about, okay, so what about people who feel called to do something but they can't do it because of finances or time or whatever? So then I was thinking about when we were in college and we were working at Arby's making roast beef sandwiches. Was that our calling? Were we being called to make roast beef sandwiches? And I will definitely say that I did not feel called to make roast beef sandwiches and put them through the drive-through window. Did you?
No, I did not. And you bring up a good point, which is that vocation really means calling.
Yes.
And it comes from a Latin word, vocar or something. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't speak Latin. But it means calling. And who are you being called by? It's being called by God.
Right.
So it's God calling you to something. And so I still, knowing that, you still think, well, that's still probably what your work is, right? What your paid employment is. But here is the clincher. According to the Catholic Church, vocation is not anything to do with your job. You can still have a job, but it is separate from your vocation.
And jobs are important and work is important. And it is important that we as Christians work, but...
Right. But there's something that has priority above that. Something that is, who you are even to a greater extent than the work that you do. So your vocation is one of three things. It's either the religious life, so maybe a priest or a nun. It's the single life where you are not married, and then there's married life, which encompasses motherhood.
Right.
Radical motherhood.
There you go.
Yeah. So to me, that was like a huge revelation.
Right.
Like, oh, thank goodness I didn't screw this up after all. I mean, I still kind of screwed it up because for a long time I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't really think about the importance of what I was doing as a mom.
And I think that
and a wife.
That something that a lot of us mess up is thinking that we are called to something. Like I felt called to be a nurse, so I became a nurse, which I also felt called to be a mother. And so can those two things coexist? They can, but I think you have to say that being called to be a mother is enough. That's enough of a thing in itself. You don't have to be, well, I have this desire to do this, or I really feel like I would be good at this, and you probably would be good at that thing that you feel like you're good at. But being called to motherhood is enough of a thing to do. Being called to be in a family is enough.
Yes. Well, and truth be told, I don't care what you are doing as a job. You could be the president of the United States or, a famous brain surgeon or whatever, running this charity that helps millions of poor people. And you're still the only mom that your kids are ever going to have. And I think that, I'm divorced. And so I know what it's like to screw up a vocation, a real vocation. And I think that thinking that you have to do everything and thinking that motherhood is just something that just happens. Like I gave birth to this child and now I'm going to make sure that it lives, and goes to school and graduates and moves out of my house. That's not, motherhood is bigger than that and it's more important than that. And it's not something that you can just kind of
do in your meantime.
Right. Like, I'm really called to be a nurse. I'm going to do that all day. I'm going to focus on that because that requires a lot of skill. Yeah. And I went to school for that. And who goes to school to be a mom? You don't need to go to school to be a mom. And I totally thought that. By the time I was a mother, I had already decided that I don't know how to say it. I guess by the time I was a mom, I should have been thinking about my vocation, right? I should have decided what my vocation was before I did it.
Right.
But none of that ever happened for me. I was a mom all of a sudden, and it just, came out of nowhere, and I was young and stupid, and I had no idea. And I think that a lot, I don't know. I think that a lot of people just don't give it very much thought.
No.
Like, you put so much thought into what you're going to do. Like, where am I going to go to college? What am I going to major in? Or, if you don't go to college, still, like, what is my job? That's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Finding what job you're going to have. And motherhood is just kind of like, well, everybody does that.
Yeah.
Everybody has babies. Like, what?
It's part of, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was reading about this, and the thing that I got out of it the most is that our calling, our vocation as Christians, is to love and serve others.
Right.
And motherhood is the perfect
kind of like
place
the avenue that
yes.
a lot of us are called to. So
Right.
there's the avenue of religious life, and there's the avenue of single life, and then there's the avenue of married life. And those are how God has called you to express that love
right
to the world
and to serve
and to serve Him.
serve those yes.
Yeah.
So every time you even and then I thought about this too with like let's say that I was a single person and my job was working at a fast food restaurant handing out sandwiches through the window. You can still do that serving others and through God's love.
Right.
It's not that anything that you're doing, any vocation, any job, whatever we're doing as Christians, we do out of love and we do it to serve God. So
yes, it's a choice. Definitely.
it's a choice, and motherhood is the ultimate sacrifice. I think the ultimate act of service.
I think for me, anyway, it was very humbling to let go of my identity as a working person because at work, if you're good at what you do and you get praised for what you do, and people think, "Oh, she's so smart. She's such a good nurse. She's whatever." That's really tough when you have to let all of that go and you're at home and no one is saying that anymore.
No one cares what you do.
And no other adult, I guess, is recognizing your contribution. And so you start to feel like it's not really a contribution because no one
cares.
Yeah.
To tell you how good it is. Yeah.
The only person that matters is God. He's watching.
Yes. Ooh, I wrote that down. Wait. Here's what I wrote down. God notices even if no one else does.
That's true.
And I have a Bible verse here, which you'll have to look it up because I don't have what it says in front of me. Colossians 3:23. So,
do I get to talk about Dorothy Day for just a second?
You have 30 seconds.
Okay. So I just finished this biography of Dorothy Day, and the really quick synopsis of who was Dorothy Day. She was born in the really late 19th century, like 1890 something, and so she lived until 1980. So she saw this whole progression of the 20th century, and she kind of was an aspiring author and thought she was friends with all of these famous authors, and that was what she really wanted to do, but she really just wasn't great at it. So this guy came along and kind of inspired her to start this newspaper, and it was all about the worker. So she wasn't an official registered member of the Communist Party, but she was definitely sympathetic with that. And so she was all about labor unions and telling the story of the American worker, and she started a newspaper called The Catholic Worker, which led to starting a house for the poor, which they spread all over the country, but the one in New York City that she started was called the Joseph House or St. Joseph House, and it was just a place for homeless people to come, and there were no rules, there were no expectations. You just came and you had a room and you had food, and so anyway, so she really felt called by God to do this, and it was obviously, to her, it was obviously God's work. And she would go across the country and she would talk about this, and she was a pacifist, so she would talk about that. And she really felt strongly that that was what her purpose was. But she had a daughter.
Yeah.
She had a daughter, and there is a cause for her to become a saint. And I really am conflicted about that because she had this daughter who basically, Fisher. We'll be out in just a second. Just a second. So she kind of ignored this daughter, and she was sent off to boarding school. And she grew up in these Catholic worker houses, which were notoriously scary and chaotic. And
people
you can
coming
imagine.
and going.
You can imagine what that might be like.
Yeah.
And they were always dilapidated and run down. And so anyway, so even someone as big of a historical figure as Dorothy Day, the fact to me that she had this daughter that she really, and even she would admit, that she failed in a lot of ways. I think she missed the boat. Mm-hmm. I think that, and I asked Em if I could talk about my little analogy, so I'm going to bring that up too. When you're raising a child, you are building a foundation, right?
Yes.
And so you can think, changing this diaper, who cares about this? Making this meal, who cares? Comforting this child when they're, upset for the millionth time over the same thing. What does that really matter? But you're building a foundation, and every little piece of that foundation is integral to the final building.
Right.
And so if you screw up enough of those little pieces, that building is not going to stand. And if you think about that and think about, then this child goes on to raise their family and their family. If you're looking for importance, that's huge. It is a huge thing. And I think, I'm not a historian by any means, but I've read about a lot of famous bad guys, and they had crappy home lives. Mm-hmm. Like Hitler, for example. Think if he had the perfect family.
Right.
If his family had been able to nurture him and just raise him the way that God intended for him to be raised, there's a world war you could avert. So I don't think we can discount all those little things. And like you said, God sees them.
Right.
And God knows the number of hairs on our head.
Right.
God knew us before we were born. And so each one of us is infinitely important.
Yes.
Infinitely.
And each of our actions, each of those little tiny things we do.
Mm-hmm. And, every job that I've ever had, I'm sure I was replaced within days. Mm-hmm. And I saw people, management level, kind of like the highest up in the company that I was at anyway. I saw them downsized and they just weren't replaced.
Yeah.
Or, they left, they had been working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and they were this was their life. Yeah. They were consumed. Yeah. And then to not have that even replaced, to have that job just dissolve, I mean, that's that's an eye-opening thing to watch.
But if you have, as a mother, we are irreplaceable.
Irreplaceable. Definitely irreplaceable. And yeah, as someone who has been involved in the foster care system, mm-hmm. You have an impact that can never be erased, I guess. Right. For better or for worse. We are the foundation of those kids' lives.
And everyone's
it's an
lives.
Art.
It is.
There are so many things that go into being a mom. Yeah. So many. I mean,
and I think if anybody has been a mom for any period of time, they can look back and say, oh man, I wish I would have done that differently. Well, and think about a million things. I would go back and say, I wish I could do that differently. But, think about if you had thought about it in the beginning, like
if you had approached it like you approach your education and your career.
Yes.
Totally.
And you can do that. You can still do that. You can start today.
That's true.
Start right now.
Oh.
So, yeah. Anyway, the point is,
I think the point is that motherhood is a calling.
Yes.
And being a wife, on top of that, is a calling, and that is.
And that's enough.
It's huge.
It's huge.
It's huge.